Culling is an important part of your post-production. I might call it the most important part for a couple of reasons. It's often not the most fun part of the process, but it is the part where you learn the most about your own abilities as a photographer. And there are some who suggest this valuable skill should be outsourced. Let's talk about it. We'll get to the good stuff, but first let's quickly define what culling is. Culling is when you take the total amount of photographs you shot for an event and choose your favorites from that collection that you will then process and turn into the final photographs that will be delivered to your client. Traditionally, this is something wedding and portrait photographers do ourselves. There have always been services where you could outsource this, and more recently there are AI tools that make a lot of promises to balance how much time you're saving versus the quality of the work you're actually going to produce. I find these claims suspect at best. In my early days, I used to edit out, which is to say when I was going through the photos from an event, I would immediately delete or otherwise mark for deletion the ones that wouldn't make the cut, leaving the remainder as the keepers. On the advice of others, which was quickly borne out in practice, it was more efficient to edit in. There are fewer keepers, sometimes significantly more so than there are frames not worth your time or attention. So every time you hit that button, it takes a moment of your time. It doesn't seem like pressing a single button to mark a frame one way or the other takes very much time, and it doesn't, per image. But when you do it several hundred times, or several thousand times going through a full wedding, those single presses add up. When you press the button fewer times, it's a faster process. Even when editing in, culling is a process that takes time. You get better at it as the years go on, identifying the bad ones from the mediocre ones, from the decent ones to the great ones. As I'm going through them the first time, making the decision of which ones to keep, I'm already making choices for which images will be the ones I promote on my blog or post on social media. I'll do that by marking them with a star. If there are images I think will need a little extra attention, maybe a little extra sharpening or removing an exit sign from the background, or portraits that need an eye swap because of the ever-present blinker in the bunch, I'll mark those with a color. As long as I keep everything in Lightroom, those stars and colors will remain as I go through post-production. So when I'm done processing, I can sort by these elements and efficiently enhance those particular images. I use Lightroom for all my post-production, including culling, reserving any final retouching or compositing for Photoshop. Adobe keeps adding great tools into Lightroom, so I'm doing a bit less in Photoshop these days, but I still do find Photoshop faster and more efficient for most of my retouching. Lightroom is exceedingly processor and power hungry, so unless you have a more powerful computer, you also might find Photoshop the better option for fixing stray hairs or removing power lines from the background of a portrait. When I bring my raw files into Lightroom, I'll have it apply a preset I created and also generate one-to-one previews. Applying my look upon import gets me closer to the final result right away, and generating full-size previews lets me go through the photos at 100% size much faster because everything is pre-rendered. Generating these full-size previews can also take some time, so if you have an older computer, it might be something you might want to run overnight. Your workflow is going to be dependent on your particular system and how you have everything configured. You'll figure it out. That's the nuts and bolts of culling, or at least how I do it. There are also the reasons why I'm doing it this way, why I do it myself, and why I think you'll benefit from doing it yourself too. Looking at every frame you shot teaches you what you did on site and in the moment, what worked and what didn't. This is an important way we can grow as photographers. There are any number of settings or techniques we can intentionally employ or inadvertently make. Maybe your shutter speed was way too high or way too low. Maybe your camera locked focus on a person behind the subject you intended to lock focus on. These are all learning opportunities, and sometimes you land upon a happy accident which you can then try to intentionally recreate next time. If your focus point was just a little bit off, that forces you to learn better sharpening techniques in Lightroom or Photoshop. If you've underexposed and have to bring up the exposure more than you usually might in Lightroom, this forces you to learn a better approach to noise reduction. Maybe you were experimenting with different compositional techniques or different lighting. Maybe one of your off-camera lights didn't recycle quickly enough, but you got a really cool shot out of the other later lights that did fire. You have to see these frames in comparison to one another to learn from them. Culling my own images, I've learned better ways to layer foreground, middle ground, and background objects for better compositions. I've learned that sometimes one or two frames of a moment or a portrait or a detail isn't enough because you can't go back and redo any of them later. I've discovered better ways of lighting and dealing with reflections because I experimented on site and can look later at what I did and learn what worked. When you outsource this decision to others, and I'm looking at you AI culling services, you're outsourcing your creativity and your opportunity for growth. I have to admit, though, there's an asterisk that needs to be added to claims like these. If your work is more staged and posed rather than organically capturing moments, these tools might work for you. I think the same could be said for portrait photographers. If you're taking a number of frames of largely the same scene or pose, an AI-based tool might be a reasonable choice for weeding out the blinks and less sharp frames. I'm inclined to think this applies to fewer of us, so I stand by my original argument. And hey, I get it. If it's November and you've had 1 or 2 weddings every weekend for the past 2 months and you find yourself in the weeds, you're looking for whatever advantage you can to get your work back to your clients on time. There's no shame in using outside services here and there to get yourself out from under. There can be pressing reasons why you would need to take that shortcut. I can't say I've never availed myself of outside help here and there over the years. Work needs to get out the door, and there are times that takes priority. Despite these asides, and on the whole, I firmly believe that looking at every frame yourself is an opportunity. Sure, sometimes it can be a slog, but the commitment you put in time to examine your own skills gives you the tools to avoid those things that didn't work and double down on those that did. All of this is work. It's time consuming, and you really have to love it if you're going to do it for any length of time. If you're taking a results-oriented approach to your photography, don't shortchange yourself by not culling your own work and learning what works best for you and for your clients in the long run. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your taking the time to listen. If you like what you heard, feel free to leave a like, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. What are your thoughts on culling your own photos versus outsourcing? Have you used any of these AI tools? And if so, what do you think? Feel free to share in the comments. If you'd like to see more videos like this and hear more stories, check out this other one I made for you. This is Ask a Wedding Photographer. I'm Seth Kaye, and I'm here to help.